Good afternoon, everybody. How was lunch? Good. Good. This afternoon's seminar, Prop 12, on the on-farm certifications have occurring on farms across Minnesota. While California Department of Forestry and Agriculture have outlined certification criteria, many questions remain. Take this opportunity to learn from Jamee Eggers, a certified agent, Dr. Sievers, and Dr. Cara Haden about the certification process, the lessons learned to date. Please help me welcome Jamee Eggers, Dr. Sievers, and Dr. Cara Haden.
Okay, it is my distinct pleasure to stand here in front of you and especially to collaborate with Dr. Haden and Dr. Sievers on this topic. Many of you have seen me present. This is not going to be a normal presentation in my style. There's lots of words on these slides and lots of definitions, and it gets kind of technically dense. So I apologize to you for that part of it, but that is truly the only way to understand, and I'm using the air bunnies, understand the actual regulations that are written into Prop 12 and how it applies to the on-farm certification process. I'm also going to walk you through a little bit of the actual process and what the certifying agent looks for when they come to the farm and do the certification. And then the veterinarians will help. That's the piece that you really want to listen to. This regulatory jargon is not quite as interesting, but the veterinarians will share some really interesting kind of case studies and taking some of their farms through certification. And it's going to be much more interesting to learn from your peers about the actual application than it is the certification process, for sure. So many of you know this stuff already, but in November of 2018 was when the voters in California actually approved Proposition 12, which was the Farm Animal Confinement Initiative, and it defines the covered animals or the products that are that have to be inspected. So veal calves, breeding pigs, and egg-laying hens. And then, as you know, there was a flurry of legislative and legal activity that took place between then and now, really. But the important date was September 1st of 2022, when California actually finalized the regulations that detail the space requirements, the exemptions that will go through, the record-keeping requirements, and then the process for certification. And then with the ruling of the Supreme Court in May of last year, it allowed the implementation and enforcement of Prop 12 to go forward. So all of the certifying agents did a lot of on-farm certifications, particularly for pork producers, largely from between, I can't see my slides that way, largely between roughly Halloween and the end of the year to make sure that producers were certified before that final implementation date, which was January 1st of this year. This is the enforcement framework, or the regulatory framework that California shares with everybody involved. And the most important pieces for you would be the producers at the top, so the sow farm, and then the various stages of production, and then here the registered pork distributors. They also define end users, and we'll go through some of those definitions, but the two people in the two groups in the regulatory framework that have to be inspected annually by a certifying agent are the sow farm and then the pork distributors. Okay, here's where we get into the really heavy definitions. The reason that these definitions are important is this is the way that the regulations or the law is put forth to producers. So a little bit of this is interpretation and understanding, but the devil truly is in the details of these definitions. So the audit trail refers to the records that have to be held in sufficient detail from the beginning of the sow farm all the way to the end user from the distributor. So producers, packers, processors, distributors all play a role in maintaining records in the audit trail. And then a compliant enclosure is specific to the farm. So this is the enclosure that the animals are in, and it has to meet for pigs the 24 square feet, and then also the lie down, stand up, fully extend legs, and turn around freely. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about what turn around freely looks like from the California Department of Food and Agriculture. Split operations is also a really important definition to understand. So that means that an operation can produce or distribute covered products as well as non-covered products. The true application of split operation means you can have a sow farm that meets the 24 square feet requirement for Prop 12, and you can market the meat of the offspring of those pigs on that farm as Prop 12 product. You can also use gestation stalls on that same farm as you were previously prior to Prop 12 becoming a law, and as long as you segregate the product. Okay, so both can happen on the same farm. The veterinarians will have experience on whether or not that's actually practical on a large farm, but it is an option. Usable floor space is defined by the department as the total square footage of floor space provided to the covered animals, and we will go through an example of how you calculate it, but it is the total square footage of the enclosure of usable floor space divided by the number of animals in that enclosure. We're going to go through two really important definitions here about the management of pigs. So a breeding pig is any female pig in a commercial breeding operation who is 6 months of age or older or pregnant. There are ors and ands in here that are really, really important in the definitions. So breeding pig and then the production cycle. Production cycle is the life cycle of a commercial breeding pig from breeding to farrowing, essentially, or weaning. But for the purposes of this is where there's a really important and. So how do we address gilts in Prop 12 production? So they have to be 6 months of age or older, and they have to be moved into an enclosure for breeding. So you can run, so not all gilts, which are in your production system, is going to be older than 6 months, right? Not all of them have to be in Prop 12 compliant housing from the beginning. They only have to be in that Prop 12 compliant housing when they begin their production cycle, as defined by when they are moved to an enclosure for breeding. I know you guys are staring at me like, what? That doesn't make any sense. This'll really, it'll be more easily understood when we work through some examples. There are some exemptions to when breeding pigs do not need to be in compliant housing. So if they're being used for medical research, if during examination, testing, individual treatment, or operations for veterinary purposes, the veterinarians will share some very specific examples of utilizing those exemptions and what that means. They don't have to have 24 square feet for transportation, for rodeo exhibitions, state county fair, that kind of thing. And then during slaughter when performed in accordance with Humane Slaughter Act. And then you have the other two exemptions. A breeding pig during the 5-day period prior to the breeding pig's expected date of giving birth. So this means in practicality that they don't have to have 24 square feet from 5 days before their expected farrowing date until they farrow. And then during temporary periods for animal husbandry purposes, and this is where you get some specific limitations, 6 hours in a 24-hour period and no more than 24 hours total in a 30-day period. And again, you'll get some really practical examples of the application of that exemption in the next couple of presentations. So if you're a farm that wants to be certified to sell Prop 12 product, what does the process look like for you? The steps for certification mean that you reach out to one of the certifying agents. You can find the list on the California Department of Food and Agriculture. There are roughly 14 certifying agents on the list right now. Not all of them are based in the United States, and not all of them do all of the covered products. So for example, some of them might only do laying hens, or they may only do pork. So if you're in the laying hen business too and you need that certifying agent, they can't help you. So once you narrow out the list of people that do pork and that are based in the United States, it comes to about 6 or 7 right now. For distributors, you have to register with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. There are producers that are distributors. So if you're a producer that's direct marketing pork, like you do internet sales to California, you also need to be registered as a distributor. And that has a separate kind of inspection and some details in the record keeping. But those distributors have to be registered with CDFA. Then you work with the certifying agent that you have hired on the farm to come out and schedule your visit. There are tools that I'll share at the end, some voluntary self-assessments that you can use. You don't have to turn those into anybody. It just helps you prepare for your inspection. Then you go through your audit, you correct any corrective actions that you need. You receive your certificate, which I'll show you an example of, and then you're required to, if you want to stay selling Prop 12 product, you have to recertify every 12 months, and it can't be 1 day later than your previous inspection date. So what is the auditor looking for when they come out to the farm? They are primarily looking at two things: the animal confinement, so the enclosures that the animals are in for the 24 square feet that they can turn around freely, and then the time if they are spending any in non-compliant housing, what does that look like? And then the record keeping. And so we'll go through some examples here with the animal confinement piece. So the auditor is literally coming to look that all of the sows that are in a production cycle that will be recognized as Prop 12, the offspring will be sold as Prop 12 product. They are going to measure the pens and count the number of pigs in there to verify that the sows have 24 square feet. So here's an example of a pen that is 10 feet by 14.4 feet. So you multiply that to get the total square footage, and you literally divide it by the number of 6 sows in there. They are checking that for every enclosure on the farm. The concept of turning around freely is defined by California Department of Food and Agriculture, means it can turn a full circle without any impediment, including a tether, and without touching the side of the enclosure that they're in or another animal. So if you think of the Austin Powers, like when he gets the little cart stuck in the hallway, right? Like the 73-point turn doesn't count as turning around freely in the pen. A 3-point turn doesn't count either. So some visual examples of that. This pen, or this enclosure, is 10 foot by 20 foot, so you have 200 square feet total. You have 8 sows in there. The sows can back out of their free access stalls or the feeding stalls that they have, whatever they may be, and they have room in that back alley to turn a full circle without touching the side of the enclosure, without having to touch another animal. So this would be considered a compliant enclosure with this many animals in it. The same thing can happen if you have a narrow alleyway between your stalls, but they have a larger open pen in which, so they can back out of their stall, back into the larger pen, and then turn around freely. That is also considered acceptable by California Department of Food and Agriculture. So then the next piece that the auditor will be reviewing is the record keeping. The regulations were published in September 1st of 2022, which means that records related to Prop 12 production need to have begun by September 1st of 22. Nobody knew what the rules were, so almost everybody had that type of corrective action. You have to maintain the records for 2 years. And then this is where it gets a little bit open to interpretation by certifying agents, but the records have to be kept in sufficient detail to document that the covered animals were confined in compliance with the regulations. So it doesn't necessarily specifically define for you that it has to be this spreadsheet or that it has to be this in this record. It allows for flexibility of group animal records versus it doesn't require individual animal ID. So it's pretty open, but in general, the things that the auditor will be checking when they're there is that there's the 6 hours within a 24-hour period and no more than 24 hours in a 30-day period, so however you are documenting that. And then if you are using any of the exemptions for non-compliant housing, like individual treatment, for any of the veterinary exemptions, that they will be checking the farrowing to make sure that the sows that are in farrowing weren't placed there more than 5 days before their expected farrowing date. And then if the sow is going to be considered Prop 12 compliant for her next production cycle, that she is moved back to compliant housing within 6 hours of weaning. And then there is a multitude of records that you have to verify if the operation is a split operation. In general, are you keeping records that identifies the offspring of the Prop 12 sows and segregating and keeping it separate in your transportation away from the sow farm all the way to finishing, all the way to slaughter, separate from the sows that were not? and their offspring that were not held in compliant housing. So just a reminder that your audit the on-farm audit does include all of the covered animal enclosures. It's not just a random sample. If you're used to common swine industry audit or other welfare auditing, it's a certain percentage or a sample of your farm. The Prop 12 certification or audit involves all of your enclosures. You do have time to correct some corrective actions, and you get to work with your certifying agent on that. You have to pass all of the criteria in the Prop 12 audit. There is no like partial certification. You have to be yes on all of the things before you can receive it. So then your audit goes through like an internal certification review, and then if everything is good, you get your certificate, which is, you have the example up there on the screen, and then you must reapply, re-audit, and recertify every year prior to your original inspection date. If you go 1 day longer, anything that you bred or farrowed in the time that lapsed can't be sold as Prop 12 product. And then, of course, all of the certifying agents would have an expectation that you will update any of the corrective actions, or that you've addressed any of the corrective actions from your original inspection. That the idea would be that you don't do that again, right? Like you have corrected it for forever. Some of the most common non-conformances that we saw last year in a lot of the Prop 12 auditing was that gilts and sows are held at different densities. So understanding that gilts are usually smaller than your big P4s, right? The square footage is for the animal. It's not dependent on the size of the animal, which is doesn't make a lot of sense to us that are in production, but that's the way that the laws are written. So if you are the easiest way to understand this is if you are breeding gilts in your GDU, then your GDU needs to be at 24 square feet. But there's not an allowance or an exemption for different densities between gilts and sows, even with their age or their size. And then my point is you have to recall the definition of breeding pig and production cycle. So as soon as you lock them up to be bred is when you breed them, when you breed them is when their production cycle starts, and they have to be in compliant housing that entire production cycle. We have seen some situations where they're leaving animals in non-compliant treatment enclosures until farrowing, and I'll let the veterinarians talk about the veterinary exemptions and how that applies, but CDFA has made it clear that that isn't the intent of the regulation, that you need to have follow-up and documentation to show that you're not just saying this sow needs treatment and I'm going to leave her here until she farrows, or if a sow needs individual treatment, you can't move her into the farrowing stall until she farrows. You have to have a lot of documentation and rely on your VCPR to cover that. Some other countries have expressed a lot of interest in Prop 12 certification. As you may know, a lot of European EU countries have welfare regulations that dictate the way they raise sows, and a lot of countries have expressed frustration that, like, well, I should automatically apply to Prop 12 because we are country regulation, and there is no equivalency program anywhere. It doesn't matter if the EU regulation was stricter than Prop 12, which most aren't. It doesn't matter. There's zero equivalency. Everybody needs to be inspected. So some countries allow for like 10% of the inventory on the sow farm to be in gestation stalls at a period of time. Doesn't matter. And others allow for kind of the open pen gestation management style that we are familiar with here, where the sows spend 28 days in the gestation stalls. Again, doesn't apply to Prop 12. No equivalency whatsoever. And then we've just seen the majority of the non-conformances have been a lack of documentation. So the clear VCPR and standard operating procedures and treatment policies, protocols for how you put the sows in individual treatment and what that means. And then it's not a common practice to record the date in which you place the sows into farrowing. And so that's another one that's been missing from the beginning. I'm actually going to save these burning questions in this presentation for our group discussion, but what I wanted to share was that Cloverleaf Animal Welfare Systems has a number of tools you can use to prep yourself for your on-site inspection if you are interested, and they're available to everyone. It doesn't matter if you hire Cloverleaf as your certifying agent or not. They have a lot of visual reference guides on the housing, applicable and approved housing setup, and then all kinds of self-service kind of pre-certification tools you can use. Okay.
All right, so Jamie got the boring stuff, which was really, really important. And so today I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about some of the implications of Prop 12. So yes, the certification process is difficult and you have to jump through a lot of these hoops, but there's the honest experience of what happens after you become certified that is something that you really truly need to understand if you want to become Prop 12 compliant. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today, and then I think Chris has some more experiences to share, and then certainly in the questions, I would love to answer kind of what we're doing for protocols and how we're managing certification. So my name is Cara Haden. I'm a veterinarian with Pipestone, and I'm the director of animal welfare for Pipestone. And so unfortunately, Prop 12 has been kind of a welfare thing that we have had to deal with at Pipestone. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So when I'm assessing welfare, I like to utilize the 5 domains. So familiarity with the 5 domains in the room? Okay, pretty good. So 5 domains, we kind of have 3 categories that we're looking at. The first is the physical state of the pig. So physically what is happening to the pig. And so here we look at nutrition, environment, behavior, interactions, and health. That's that top category. Then we move down and we extrapolate, okay, what does that mean the mental, emotional state of the pig is? And then based on those 2 categories, we say, okay, what's the welfare of the pig? Is it the pig is living a life worth living, good welfare? Is the pig's welfare okay, or is the pig suffering? Okay, so if we're looking kind of down that, if we're talking about nutrition, so physically the pig has a diet that has been formulated to meet its needs and the pig is eating it. That's physical. So then we extrapolate out that, okay, based on that, the pig is full and content, and so we say that that pig is in a positive welfare state. So that's how that works, and the reason why this is important is because when we talk about Prop 12, kind of one of the questions is there a perfect system for housing sows? And I would argue that there's not a perfect system. And so we need to come from that place of understanding that every system, no matter what it looks like, is going to have pros and cons. And so up here, I just put kind of a pig out in nature versus a pig in a stall. What are the pros and cons in those cases? And so a pig out in nature, right, interactions, behavior, they get to do whatever they want. They can go around, they can root, they can interact with whatever animals that they want to. And so we have kind of plus, plus, plus there from a welfare standpoint. But if we look at nutrition, environment, and health, it might not necessarily be plus, plus, right? The environment of the pig is the environment of the pig. So if it's hot, the pig's hot. If it's cold, the pig is cold. From a nutrition standpoint, the welfare could be excellent if the pig is able to readily find food and water, but it could be really poor if that's not the case. And then wild pigs, I don't know if you guys know this, but they don't have veterinarians who are there to take care of them in case they get sick, in case they get a parasitic infection. There's nobody that's looking around to watch for the 2-day rule to do timely euthanasia on a pig that's had a broken leg in the wild. So health is probably a pretty major negative on a wild pig. Okay, just the reason I bring this up is we need to make sure we know what we're comparing to because there's no perfect system. So if we look at a stall system, we basically swap, right? Interactions behavior, which was really positive in a wild pig, is on the fairly negative side, right? They don't have negative interactions with other sows, which is positive, but certainly they don't have the ability to move around and express natural behaviors. But if we look at these other pieces, nutrition, environment, health, we do a really great job in stalls of being able to control the nutrition for the sow. We control that environment really nicely. In most cases, we're raising these pigs inside. And then from a health standpoint, we can see when she's not eating. We can see when she's lame. We can treat her. We can take care of her when she's inside a stall. So what does Prop 12 look like? So when we look at Prop 12, right, that interactions behavior part, that dominant sow, it's a plus, 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 right? She's the boss girl. She gets the water. She gets the feed. She gets the spot that she wants to lay. She's got to maybe do a little bit of biting to get there. But she's living a pretty good life from an interactions behavior standpoint in a Prop 12 system. But those non-dominant or those more kind of calm, docile sows that are not willing to fight, right? There's been some really good papers looking at the stress level and how it's really stressful for them to be in pen gestation and how they have fear associated with resources. Am I going to be able to get to the water, or is the boss sow going to be laying in front of it? Am I going to be able to get to my feed, or is the boss sow going to come and bite my vulva and finish up my meal before I get a chance? And so that's a very real implication that we have to think through from Prop 12. From a nutrition standpoint, I put plus minus because, again, that dominant sow's not worried. She's going to get all the feed that she wants. The submissive sow is the one who's maybe afraid to go up to that ESF feeder to go get her diet. She's the one who's maybe going to get beat up or pushed around a little bit while she's waiting to go in. Or in a stanchion system, she might have a difficult time holding her own to get her feed. Environment, I think, is pretty similar. Right? The environment inside the pig barn for stall or pen, we're going to control for hot weather with drippers, or with cool cells, we're going to control for cold weather with heaters. Although I think it's a really interesting concept to think about Prop 12, the lack of stocking density, some increased use in propane, and some really important discussions on sustainability around that piece as well. But health, right? I'm a veterinarian. Health is super, super important to me. And so I'm going to share some numbers here. Looking at Prop 12 compared to some of our other systems. And so this is specifically looking at lameness. So we track how many sows we treat for lameness. We track our recovery rates for lameness. We track how many we're culling for lameness, and then how many are dying for lameness. And so if you look at this, we have our stall barns, our pen barns, and our Prop 12 barns. And what you'll see extremely disappointingly here is that this Prop 12 system that has been sold to the public as being better for welfare, we really struggle from a lameness standpoint. And so our stall barns, 3.5% of the herd gets treated in 10-week period, and 10.2% in our Prop 12 barns. And that is a number I am not proud to share with you guys, right? That's not a good story to tell from a Prop 12 standpoint. The number of animals that we cull is double in our Prop 12 farms for lameness, and then the percent dead is more than double in our Prop 12 farms from a lameness standpoint. Okay, injections per week. So this is a metric that we look at with how well are our caregivers doing. And so this is not looking at the number of sows, this is looking at the number of injections. So a lame sow may get 6 injections, right? 3 anti-inflammatories, 3 antibiotics. So this is not number of sows, this is literally how many times our caregivers have to go into a pen and inject a sow. And so if I standardize for a stall barn, a 5,000 barn being baseline, our pen barns, we have 80 additional anti-inflammatory injections and 70 additional antibiotic injections per week. And then look at that huge jump to Prop 12. So we are giving 265 more injections per week on a Prop 12 barn. And so none of these numbers were taken like at the time that we were training or transitioning a barn. We did not pull data into this data set until they had been Prop 12 compliant for at least 6 months, just to try to kind of avoid that time period. So this is real, and this has a very real impact on the welfare of the pigs. And then sow death loss, another one, not super proud to share that our Prop 12 barns are almost 2% higher sow mortality. And you guys saw in the earlier slide that a lot of that is attributed to lameness. And so the question is, does it matter, right? Our producers are getting paid a premium to produce Prop 12 pigs, and so hopefully that premium makes up for the production losses and the increase in sow mortality, so does it matter? Does it matter that sow mortality is higher and we treat way more sows and there's way more lame sows on our Prop 12 barns? I would say that from an animal welfare standpoint, it all comes down to the pig. And so the question is, does it matter to the pig? And absolutely, yes, it matters to the pig. So going through lameness, if we kind of think here, we've got a lame sow, right? She is physically in pain. She physically has a difficult time getting to the feeder and doing what she needs to do. And so that the mental state that we can extrapolate is, right, she's in pain, she's afraid, she's experiencing stress. That's not a super positive welfare state for our pigs. And so this simply is not something that we can just accept as an industry, that our Prop 12 barns are going to have worse welfare from a health standpoint. And so what can we do, right? So I wish I could give you guys some studies of what are some really quick things that you can do. We've done a ton of pilot projects working on how to reduce fighting and how to solve the lameness problems. And this summer, hopefully, we're going to have an intern doing kind of some layered kind of stacking studies to try to understand, like, are there 3 interventions we can put in place? But here's some basic things. So you really need to think through pen design. So what we have seen is that typically the smaller the pen, the easier it is for them to establish that hierarchy. And so that fighting window tends to get a little bit shorter. And so really thinking, okay, I know gating is expensive, but loss and lameness and some of the welfare implications are also expensive. So we really need to think through that. Gating, this is another one. Where are your gates located? So we all love to have these nesting areas, right? That's really nice for that sow to have that particular space where she can lay down and sleep. We need to be really careful that that gating is not sticking out into the area right behind the ESF feeder where it could cause injury to sows. So there's a lot of things that you need to be aware of as you're designing pens to try to reduce lameness and fighting. And then flooring. Having dry floors is huge. So we can accept a certain amount of fighting, and if they're not slipping and sliding and pulling muscles and getting injured, then that amount of fighting might be okay as long as the floors are dry. So dry flooring is absolutely huge. Again, this comes into pen design. Where are you putting your water nipples? What kind of water nipples do you have? Things along those lines. I would not recommend swinging water nipples, especially right behind the ESF feeders, which is for some reason where everybody in barn design loves to plan on putting them. So those are kind of 3 things you can do there. Genetics, right? I hate to pull genetic companies into this, but we do need your help, genetic companies. So we definitely see a difference where we see animals from certain sources that are just more dominant and more mean in the pens, where it takes longer for that hierarchy to establish. And then we see some genetic sources where we just don't see that same amount of fighting. And so that is something I would really encourage genetic companies. We need more docile sows so that we can do a better job managing them in pens. Okay, then distraction and enrichment. From a welfare standpoint, our job is to reduce resource scarcity. So there is a certain amount of fighting that occurs just because of hierarchy. That's going to occur, but if you can reduce that scarcity of like where the water is located, how much feed she's getting, if there's a good spot for her to lie down, all of that is really important. And so as you're designing your pens, you need to make sure that you're thinking, okay, if the boss sow lays right here, can the timid sow get to the water? Or is there another spot that she can go? So we just have to really be thinking about that kind of scarcity mindset. And then distractions, right? The Europeans look at us and go, for goodness sakes, just put straw in all of your pens already and be done with it. Because that's what they're doing. But there's a reality there that the U.S. industry is different. So we don't have 500 head barns. We have 5,000 and 10,000 head barns. And the reality is we have really bad viruses that they just don't have in Europe. And so bringing in bucket loads of foraging materials for our sows from a biosecurity standpoint, I wouldn't sleep well if from a welfare standpoint I said, let's bring in this enrichment material, but we don't have a good way from a biosecurity standpoint to bring it in. And so we're really trying to find other things that we can do. So enrichment, sows want to be able to destroy it with their mouth, and they don't want it to get dirty in the dunging area. And they get bored if it's not something they can destroy in their mouth. And so that kind of presents a unique challenge as an industry is what are things that we can throw in that pen to help distract them while this hierarchy formation is occurring. So those are a couple things that I think that we need to work on as an industry. I think the main thing here is that we cannot just accept that Prop 12 production and that Prop 12 welfare is going to be worse from a health standpoint. And so we will be working hard on trying to find solutions, and hopefully everybody else in the industry as well, so that we can kind of improve this Prop 12 associated lameness that we're seeing. All right.
All right, thank you everyone for having me today. Dr. Chris Sievers from Swine Vet Center, and want to thank Jamie really for going through the auditing process. That's really the first step, right, of being able to get there, and really my talk piggybacks off of Cara's in terms of on-farm experiences that I've really had to try and combat some of that welfare issue, lameness, sow death loss that we've seen as well, and certainly don't stand up here with all the ideas or solutions today, but try and put some things in front of you what I've seen work and not work. And so certainly to start it off, not all my ideas as I stand up here collaborate closely with the Swine Vet Center group, and really fortunate to work with this group of veterinarians and now nutritionists as well in approaching these problems. And so certainly not all my ideas as I go through it. The other thing I should mention is, with everyone going through Prop 12, Cara and I were talking, right, of we only know what we know so far, and so these are kind of my biases or the systems I would work in today that would be Prop 12. And so 60 head ESF pens, 15 to 20 head or smaller stanchion style pens, and then large pen ESF. And so those would be my experiences with clients that I would consult with today, and certainly work very closely with both producers and production staff on these farms. And so definitely, I think the first question is if you're still looking at Prop 12 is before you go out and choose that farm design or the system you go with is really what farm design fits your system or your people the best. And certainly, I don't think there's a perfect one out there today, to be honest, and it's really what fits your people and your goals the best as we go through this. And so I kind of lay it out and kind of walking through a Prop 12 farm and how we've approached it. And the breeding procedures, it's a huge piece of reducing fighting and really people safety as well as some of the stuff that we've seen. Free stalls are an excellent tool. Being able to have that for that 6-hour period of lockdown and release during that breeding time. And honestly, it gives the sow an area to go lay down during a period of aggression and riding that she wouldn't have otherwise if you're just in an open pen setting. What I'll see is after we get through that initial gilt stocking is you'll have 80 to 90% of those sows choose to lay in these even when they're unlocked, right? They have food, water, and shelter, just like Cara was saying. They got life made. They're not going to get beat up by the dominant 5 or 6 sows out in the back of those. And certainly one of probably the best tools we have today to help us with Prop 12, no matter the style or design of the freestall. And really watching, or I should mention, we have done some small pen breeding. We've done quite a bit on breed projects, right? Everyone's been there on an offsite breed project. It's certainly possible. Gilt's definitely more than sows, it seems like. It takes the right people and system to do that, but small pen breeding isn't impossible for a Prop 12 system. And then really it's the fighting and the pecking order established. There's 2 periods. One is mixing gilts or service sows together. Definitely a period of hierarchy that they established at that point. But then also probably the biggest one I've seen is wean sows. That first 2 to 6 hours post-weaning, right? Very common practice to work our farrowing feeders down so we're not wasting a bunch of feed when we have to dump them and clean the room up, right? But that also means she might leave with an empty belly. You're going to hear it from me many times that sows with full bellies fight less, and so very commonly in these freestall pens, pushing them into the stall and even working through with your veterinarian on vet directives of reducing fighting and using a short lockdown period at that point to reduce fighting and reduce that initial aggression when there's a lot of hormone change, a lot of things just changed in that sow's life, right? Taking those pigs away from her. And then the final one is when to move post-breed. I think as we've worked through it, you'd love to have free stalls maybe through the whole farm. Financially, that probably isn't the reality. There's also a lot of mechanical issues that come with them through time as well. So, really is that moving them 2 to 3 days after their last service, or is it waiting till preg check? Again, depends on your farm and system, but you move them too close to that last service, you get more riding and more aggression post-estrus. If you move them too late, obviously you get into that pre-implantation period. And so pen design and management, right? Moving from the breeding area to the gestation area, right? Again, can either be done at one of those 2 periods, but again, full-bellied sows fight less. If you can feed those sows before you move them, also have feed waiting for them in the area they go to, we've definitely seen reduced fighting and aggression. It does not fix all of it, certainly. You'll still see some fighting, but it helps. Decrease the pen filling time, really designing that pen size for your system, right? A 2,500 head sow farm and a 10,000 head sow farm are not going to fill a 50 head pen in the same period of time. My experience is if that can be 2 days or less as a dynamic pen, those sows definitely fight less and go through that period better. And really every pen design is different, and so just because it works on farm A doesn't mean it's always going to work over to farm B. And working really closely with farm staff and taking a step back again and becoming more of a sow behavior expert rather than just animal welfare or treating or approaching individual problems, really listening to that sow and that animal like we've done with nursery pigs and other places taking a step back and really watching them is important. One thing we've gone back and forth on between some farms is how aggressive do you get at segregating gilts, lower body condition sows, and possibly older sows into a section as well. And it depends on your pen size, I would say, because again, you don't want to delay the pen filling time. There are some systems where it feels like sows can teach the gilts some of the ESF stuff if they haven't had prior training. But certainly sows and gilts seem to interact and fight a little more. And so again, it's more of an individual farm basis that I've seen, but something to definitely trial out within your farms and systems to see what works best for you. As Cara mentioned, I mean, lameness and elevated sow death loss from euthanized lame sows is our #1 problem we see as well. And you can see the hoof lesions that come, that girl's, walking around a lot more than what we're used to in the crated systems. And so there's a lot more foot pad overgrowth, cracked hooves. Definitely work closely with your nutrition team on everything you can do there. Like Cara said, keeping slats dry, stir fans, and proper ventilation both really help with that. And pen design with where that water cup is placed, definitely echo that as well. The best treatments, I have a question mark behind that because I don't know that we have a best treatment for some of these more injury-caused lameness versus an infectious cause of lameness. It's really hard to get that area treated without good blood flow. Anti-inflammatories help short-term and help them get back to locomotion, getting them separated to where we can take better individual care of them using vet directives. But certainly this is something that we're fighting and dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And then back to just that aggression and fighting period of everything you can do to prevent that fighting reduces the amount of riding and lameness that you see behind that. Another one that, I helped with some of the original budgets and modeling of this, and I think Dr. Yeske says it best, every model is wrong, some are useful, right? And the initial ones, I don't know that we accounted for how many greater than 24 square foot that you have in those pens, right? You can stock them to that, but what happens when you have, right, initial fallout from poor conception, preg check, lameness, riding, vet directive polls, treats, and all of a sudden you're at 30 square foot average, right? That does not cash flow wise from a facility utilization standpoint and working through that. We've tried and to my knowledge have not found a successful way of replacing females into an existing pen that's been established. They fight aggressively. We've tried it. It hasn't worked well. And so some things I've seen to address that is 2 pen sizes, one for pre-preg check, one for post-preg check, to where you can account for that preg check fallout or pre-preg check fallout and move those animals one more time to a smaller pen, still staying at 24 square foot. Some form of shifting inner gates and stanchion pens to where you can squeeze down when some of those fall out and just keep moving down the row that way. Sometimes you can use some of that for a hospital area as well. Still staying at square footage. Additional free stalls, both for hospital and sometimes as a parking area, if rebreeds and some of that have been done within a pen, so they're not staying behind when the rest of the group goes up to farrow. And then, can part of the existing pen be used for treatments such as using free stalls or a collapsible pen, a collapsible stall of some type to be able to be there for the vet directive treatment when we individually treat her for things like body condition, lameness, where she needs to be pulled out of the general population. Jamie really covered the bulk of this, and I agree with Cara, we can answer more questions as we go, but really, I guess the audits used to scare me, and they probably don't as much anymore. Certainly, it's keep the paperwork that they've asked us to have, right, and just make sure following through on keep doing that on a daily basis. Every farm is different. Design the paperwork to fit your system. Don't try to make a one-size-fits-all. Having a basic blueprint, and that can be on a spreadsheet of all your pen sizes, the pen designs, really goes well when the auditor is there and have those dimensions. So then all they have to do is go through and confirm that for you. I think that as the future rolls out, that makes the audits that much easier. The vet directives work closely with the farm and make sure they make sense. Like Jamie said, they can't be a until farrowing piece, but certainly can have recheck periods and things like body condition. You don't fix that overnight, so make sure you have the proper days allotted for that and work closely with your veterinarian on creating those. And then there are some really useful systems that have come with ESF and just electronic records in general. Things like pig flow, it tracks when you load her into a crate, it has the time. And so you have the time she's loaded in the crate and the time she farrow, all that history right there. You got your record and your documentation. You don't have to keep more papers behind. Ag view on your movements, it tracks the movement from, if it's an all Prop 12 sow farm, tracks the movement from the sow farm to the nursery to the finisher to the plant. Done. You have your paperwork you need for tracking that. And then ESF pen counts, if you're using Maximus, Justall, NEDAP, you have your pen counts in that electronic log system the day before or the day of the auditor's there. You print that out, you match it to your square footage sheet, you hand it to the auditor, and she can go through and verify that for you. It definitely gives a lot of confidence in knowing where animals are and aren't in those types of farms. Just had one just kind of quick hitters. These didn't really fit anywhere else. Pick the right training staff for ESF. It takes someone with patience. It takes someone that really understands animal behavior, how to use panels, how to use right shaker paddles to guide that animal, but still have the patience, right? It definitely, if you have the wrong person there, it can become an animal welfare issue because it gets frustrating. They don't go in there very easily, especially gilts. Body condition, right? You don't get as many chances, so be very accurate at breeding. And then one more time at preg check and be very accurate. Using calipers on those really helps. And then having your body condition curve set really helps within ESF or on boxes. ID of off-feed sows really depends on barn design. Some, an ESF system, you're going to list of all the off-feed sows. Be careful with that. That doesn't mean that you're going to find all the lame sows. That just means she didn't eat. Some of those will get far enough along that they're already past the point of recovery on lameness, so you still have to do lameness evaluation, in my opinion, beyond that. Stanchion type barns and those, you can be strategic in how you drop feed and watching for off feeds versus our old crated barns, and be quick about that and then go back and treat later would be my recommendation. Feedback or intentional rota exposure, definitely still possible. Use backpack sprayers with dye so you can go through and still expose to rotavirus versus we don't have a trough anymore in a lot of these systems, so a way that we can still get that. And then stir fans I've really seen help on drying slats in areas, especially in filtered barns, as we're dealing with pen gestation as well. With that, open her up for questions. I don't have any official studies on that, but so far in the electronic sow feeding systems, that sow knows that if she doesn't clean her meal up when she's inside that station, the next one's going to come in and get that meal for her. It seems like they are more efficient at eating that in that trough because they're in that feed box area because of that. And so far it looks to be more efficient out of the electronic feed stations. And then on top of it, you have a feed curve versus having to adjust all the boxes. But that's probably more ESF versus feed box in a stanchion setting versus just Prop 12 in that standpoint.
I would just say from a satiety standpoint, right, we just do not feed enough fiber in the United States that our sows are limit fed, and so they're probably not going to feel satiated. And so as we've looked at this with our nutrition team, we've done some things where we've upped fiber, and the diet just gets to the point where you can't afford to have that amount of fiber, and she still isn't acting like she's totally full. And so I don't know that we're going to be able to get to the point where sows truly feel like, I've eaten everything that I want to in a day. I feel the same way, frankly. So I don't know that we're ever going to be able to feed enough fiber to kind of solve that problem of her being hungry.
We use calcium chloride to limit intake. Any work been done there?
So we have not done any work with calcium chloride. We've done work with kind of some other things to try to reduce fighting. I can't say that we've really felt like there's been a nutritional answer. So.
What kind of framework is in place for when the next regulation comes, like Massachusetts Question 3, or the next one that comes down the line? What kind of stuff is in place in the barns and in the audits that can be changed and adjusted to keep our barns relevant?
That's a tough one. You didn't warn me that it would be that tough. I don't honestly know the right way to answer the question about further regulations and new regulations. Massachusetts Question 3 is definitely one that's in front of producers. I mean, it's passed in Massachusetts, and they're currently figuring out how to write the regulation for it. speaking as not a certifying agent, I think the thing that producers would hope the most for is that there'd be some equivalency, right? So that if you're Prop 12 certified, you're automatically Q3. But the short answer is we have to wait and see how Massachusetts writes their regulations, and if they follow Prop 12 and go the certifying agent route, and if there's a chance to make it similar, it benefits the certifying agents as well. Or if they're gonna do a hard right and write their own program, and then everybody will have to adjust to that.
I would just say it probably depends on the barn design of what you've chosen to go on the gestation side. Certainly the electronic sow feeders have a lot more flexibility, and there's certainly at times if you're to that maximum threshold of what the feeders can do, some producers choosing to put in extra, it does mean sows can get through those stations quicker. It also means that if at some point you can go the other way on square footage, you have that option to do so. Probably more of that was pre-Prop 12 waiting for the Supreme Court ruling. We saw some of that, and then turnaround farrowing crates is the other one. If you're building a new farm today, do you consider potentially having the ability to have those in there? And it all comes down to, like Jamie was saying, what comes with regulation. And fortunately, don't have a crystal ball there either for you.
So the question was about enrichment, right? So we just don't have kind of the same fiber sources in the Corn Belt that they do in Europe. And so what else are they using, or what else has been studied? And so there's been some fascinating work done on enrichment. And so as far as like wood goes, right, the key factor is she has to be able to destroy it. So they've actually done studies looking at different types of wood. So it's got to be a soft wood, like a pine or like a birch, something that she can actually kind of destroy. And she has to be able to actually get her mouth around it and chew it. So those things can be distracting, but you've got to mount them appropriately, because as soon as it gets covered in fecal material, she's no longer interested in it, if that makes sense. And so like Arbocele is a fiber source that we bring in to dry off pigs. That's something that we've tried in pens. That's kind of a fibrous material that we can bring in a kind of safe manner. Again, I don't have data on that, but for sure wood has been looked at, and then some other fiber sources like Arbocele. Yeah, so the question is, have we thought of bringing in pumpkins? Yeah, I mean, we've talked about all sorts of different things of, can we somehow get a cardboard box that we fill with something that we tape shut that it's a pig pinata that takes her 4 hours to kind of break open, and we've done some stuff with that. The big thing is the volume, right? Like, it's just a lot of stuff to bring in, and it's really hard to disinfect. So that's kind of the key pieces. And then, seasonality with stuff like that, so. I think one question that hasn't been asked is like, what do I do with my lame sows? I would say as a veterinarian, like set your farm up for success. So each of our Prop 12 barns has like a 28-page SOP with how we're gonna document everything and like how we're gonna treat a lame sow and exactly what that veterinarian's recommendations are for when she needs to get pulled out, for when she needs to get checked on, for when she needs to get put back in compliant housing. Just over document and make sure that your expectations are explicitly clear. So I have found that the auditors really respect the opinion of a veterinarian. And so if I say for this particular lameness condition, she can't go back in the pen until she's lost weight by having her litter, and then she's gonna be much less lame. There's things like that, but you gotta document, and you gotta make sure that your SOPs clearly state those types of things. And it can't be every sow, right? Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to the 5 domains, right? Everything is give or take. So does she have more freedom to move around and express normal behaviors? Absolutely. That is absolutely a pro. But are there a lot of negatives associated? Potentially, yes. So I think, right? But that's where we have to come back to the baseline. Like, there is no perfect system. And if this is what consumers truly want, irregardless of if they really knew the truth, right? This is what consumers want. And so we need to figure out how to make this work.
So great question about the split operations and so for clarity's sake, sows on split operations can go in and out of their Prop 12 compliance. So just because they were Prop 12 compliant sow as a P2 does not mean that they have to be in compliant housing on a split operation their next production cycle. So you get to make that, on a split operation, you get to make that decision production cycle by production cycle. So breeding to weaning. So that's a really common question about the exemptions, particularly around the 6-hour and 24-hour period, and then individual treatment and veterinary protocol. So CDFA has not set, California Department of Food and Agriculture has not set any very specific limitations or details to those exemptions. They say these are the exemptions, and if you go to CDFA and you ask them for clarification about a specific example, they will refer you to what's written in the code as the exemption, and they tell the certifying agents that's up to you to determine if it is satisfying the regulation as it is written for sufficient documentation to show that they're not confined longer than allowed by the law. So there's a lot of ambiguity there, right? And so the short answer is there's not a strong definition to it. Quite honestly, if I put my producer hat on, I think that ambiguity is to the benefit. It allows producers to make it work on their farm and their system, right? And it's not prescriptive to it can only be this and it can only be that. I think there's been lots of conversations from CDFA of what is in the spirit of the law, right? Like don't lock the sows up from whenever you decide to lock her up for treatment to the day she farrows in her farrowing stall. That's not the intent of the law. But it really depends on the relationship with the VCPR, the relationship with the veterinarian for the farm, and as Cara mentioned, the documentation and how detailed those SOPs are and kind of what that it's not a set it, we put the sow in the pen, we treat her, we set it and forget it until she farrows. It's that we have checkpoints in there and we're continuously monitoring and all of the things that you would ask for good animal husbandry. So the good question about how do you manage Prop 12 certification and auditing during disease challenges, and you're going to hate this answer, but as a certifying agent, like that's a very specific farm audit certification question that I can't really tell you in general. I can't answer that specifically for you. What I can tell you in general is that like we were just talking about with the ambiguity and the ambiguity is more negative than I mean it, but with the flexibility, the lack of detail that's written into those exemptions and treatment, there are certainly ways with the relationship with the veterinarian and the management and the record keeping of the farm that you can still operate a Prop 12 barn through a disease challenge. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right.
Okay.
It's hard.
It's hard. It's not easy. Great question about the actual regulations and the legal ramifications and obligations, I will add, for certifying agents. So the regulations, my understanding, were written by California Department of Food and Agriculture as part of their health and safety code. I don't know how much input they received in the rule writing and the regulation writing from other entities. Let me put it to you that way. I don't know the answer to that. But they wrote it. They're the regulatory agency that enforces it. They have a pretty clear complaint-based process for following up on what they believe, what anyone could believe as an infraction on that. I don't know that process well. That is very much a legal regulatory question for California Department of Food and Agriculture. I'm going to answer the last part of your question a little backwards by telling you that so the process for certifying agents to become that for the state, they have to apply, they have to share all of their business procedures and policies for certification, they have to write their audit tool, they have to talk about how they will issue certifications, how they will deny certifications, and all of those things. All of that goes through California Department of Food and Agriculture. They provide a lot of feedback to the certifying agent before they approve them as one, because certifying agents are literally acting on behalf of the state of California. And the only information, this should make producers feel more comfortable. The only piece of information that the certifying agents turn over to the state of California is an annual report, the list of certified sites. Now, certifying agents can be audited by California, so California could come back to me and say, can you show me the audit report for this particular site or whatever? But they have said that will be complaint-based. They don't plan to do it regularly. But the only thing they receive annually is that list of certified sites. And then they are, at their discretion, able to follow up on audit reports. But they don't have inventory numbers, they don't get audit reports, they don't get any of those farm-based details. Question about combining third-party animal welfare audits like common swine industry audit with the Prop 12 certification. Yes, that a lot of that took place in the fall. You have to realize that there's larger number of sites that require certification in Prop 12 than require a third-party animal welfare audit like the common swine industry audit each year. You know, packers are responsible for auditing a portion of their supply base, so there are less common swine industry audits than there are Prop 12 certifications in a year by an auditing company, but yes, an opportunity to utilize you know, the time on the farm by the auditor to do both if possible. There was a lot of that happened this fall, yes. And I forgot to address one question that you asked me towards the end about are producers subject to random people letting on the farm? No, that the Prop 12 certification process has to come through California Department of Food and Agriculture and or a certifying agent. So it's, if anybody shows up and says, I'm here to do your Prop 12 audit, and you've never had a conversation with them, they are not there to do your Prop 12 audit. And they're there for nefarious activities, right? So no, it's an announced, scheduled thing. It is not subject to random, and if I audited if I did a certification for a farm and it was subject to a California Department of Food and Agriculture, like, audit of me, that made us go back out to the farm, like, I would be having a conversation with that producer. None of this is unannounced. None of it is unauthorized visiting of farms.
Well, I appreciate all the inquiries. We're over our time, so if you have more questions, please seek out these three. Very informative discussion here. Thank you for everything. Let's give a round of applause to our three speakers.